Ooh. Ah. Oh.
Most games wear their theme like a coat. You could take it off, replace it with a different one, and the mechanics would still work. Siege Perilous isn't one of those games. Here, the theme became the mechanics. Every journey, every quest, every difficult decision, every one of them asks the same question. What makes someone worthy of becoming one of Arthur's knights? My name is Jonathan. This is Geek My Games. Let's explore the story behind the game. Before we can understand the game, we do have to understand its name, because the Siege Perilous is not a castle under attack. In this Arthurian context, the word siege means a seat. The Siege Perilous was this dangerous, unoccupied chair at King Arthur's round table, reserved for the knight destined to achieve the Grail. Anyone unworthy who attempted to occupy risked death or supernatural punishment. In the best-known later versions of the legend, the knight who did prove worthy is Galahad. That idea becomes the foundation of this game. Each player develops a knight in pursuit of the virtues and skills required to claim that legendary seat. The title is not simply atmospheric. It describes the journey, the standard by which the knights are going to be judged, and the destination towards which every player is moving. But the Siege Perilous is only one piece of a tradition that grew across centuries. There is no single definitive version of King Arthur. The Arthurian world was constructed gradually by poets, chroniclers, and storytellers working in different countries and different centuries. Early Welsh traditions described Arthur as a heroic leader surrounded by unusual warriors, giants, magical creatures, and supernatural dangers. In the 12th century, Geoffrey Monmouth helped transform Arthur into a great king whose campaigns extended across Britain and the continental Europe. Christian de Troyes developed the tradition of an individual knightly adventure and wrote the earliest surviving Grail romance through the story of Percival. German, Italian, Dutch, Irish, and other literary traditions continued reshaping the characters and expanding their world. Sir Thomas Malory later gathered many of the best-known stories into La Morte d'Arthur, one of the most influential English versions of the Arthurian cycle. Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queene used chivalric heroes and Arthurian imagery to examine the nature of virtue itself. Siege Perilous does not attempt to reconstruct one historical Britain or follow one author's canon. The creators described it as drawing from more than 5 centuries and across 7 different traditions to bring this one anthology together. That makes the game less like an adaptation of one Arthurian story and more like a playable anthology of Arthuriana. The next challenge was finding a structure broad enough to contain all of it. Designers Brian Salaba and Ivan Alexiev did not build Siege Perilous around a fixed campaign. They created a Euro-style sandbox for 1 to 4 spread across 12 kingdoms filled with interactive locations. Those locations included castles and churches and training towers, ports, markets, fountains, dungeons, and the legendary Forest Sauvage. Players are not following a predetermined sequence of chapters. They're moving through a world filled with competing opportunities. That distinction is important. A scripted adventure tells players what happens next. A sandbox asks them to decide what matters next. The designers built the setting so that quests, travel, character development, courtly encounters, and unexpected dangers could combine differently each time. The game does not provide one Arthurian legend for everyone to experience. It provides the conditions from which many different legends can emerge. That philosophy reaches directly into the mechanics. The mechanics of Siege Perilous are not simply measuring power. They're measuring knighthood. Movement is one of the clearest examples. Arthurian knights rarely remain safely at court. They leave familiar places behind and travel towards distant opportunities, uncertain encounters, and dangerous quests. By spreading those opportunities across 12 kingdoms, the game's geography becomes part of the commitment. Traveling towards one objective means postponing another. A church, a training tower, a castle, the Forest Sauvage may all offer valuable possibilities, but a knight cannot pursue all of them at once. That creates strategic tension through opportunity cost. The importance of the destination comes from everything the player must leave behind to reach it. Character development follows the same philosophy. The game asks players to improve 4 virtues and 4 skills through different forms of advancement, including tithing, and training. The division matters because Arthurian worth is not purely martial. Skills represent what a knight is capable of accomplishing. Virtues represent the character the knight has developed along the way. Training may prepare a knight for the physical and practical demands of adventure. Tithing reflects a different path towards worthiness, rooted in generosity, faith, and moral standing. The player must decide how to balance immediate capability with the broader requirements of the Siege Perilous. Advancement, therefore, does more than make a character stronger. It shapes the kind of knight that character is becoming. Quests continue through that idea. They're not isolated assignments placed into the game merely to provide rewards. They are tests that create direction and force players to decide which forms of progress matter most. Some rewards support earthly advancement. Others contribute to spiritual or virtuous development. The decision made at the end of a quest can therefore affect the knight's identity as much as the challenge itself. The forest serves a different design purpose. Castles, markets, training grounds, they all represent recognizable structures within the civilized world. The forest represents uncertainty. It is where Arthurian heroes encounter monsters and magical beings, strange strangers, and situations that cannot be anticipated from the safety of court. Dice-driven tests help preserve that uncertainty. Planning matters. Preparation matters. The abilities and companions the player has developed still matter, but preparation cannot remove every element of risk. That tension is central to the experience. A purely deterministic system could reward careful optimization, but it would struggle to create the danger and unpredictability of medieval romance. The dice ensure that a knight can be prepared for an adventure without completely controlling what that adventure becomes. Castle encounters broaden the game beyond wilderness and combat. The game includes tournament castles and political castles, populated by more than 100 knights and courtiers. Tournament castles emphasize public competition and martial reputation. Politic castles introduce relationships, influence, and the social world surrounding Arthur's court. Heroes can become members of a player's retinue. Villains can be defeated, captured, and imprisoned. These encounters create consequences that remain with the player after the immediate challenge has ended. Retinue members, mounts, and animal companions, armaments, and magical treasures then become part of the knight's developing identity. The official project lists 120 armaments, retinue members, mounts, animal companions, and magical treasures for you to gather. Mechanically, these elements create specialization and new combinations of abilities. Narratively, they provide the people, the creatures, and objects by which legendary knights are remembered. Arthur is inseparable from Excalibur. Gawain is inseparable from his reputation. Other knights are remembered through their companions, their quests, their victories, and sometimes their failures. In Siege Perilous, those details are not added after the story has been created. They are the systems through which the story is told. Movement creates the journey. Virtue and skills define the knight. Quests create purpose. Encounters create uncertainty. Equipment and retinues create identity. Every major system contributes to the same central question. Is this knight becoming worthy of the Siege Perilous? And the game's visual design records that journey as though it was already part of history. Artist J. Johnstone created more than 250 original paintings for Siege Perilous. The official project describes them as gold leaf paintings created on vellum. That choice gave artwork a very different purpose from conventional fantasy illustration. The images evoked illuminated manuscripts, heraldic art, and medieval chronicles. The flattened perspectives, symbolic poses, decorative framing, and gilded details do not attempt to make Camelot look cinematically realistic. They make the game look as though the legends were recorded by medieval artists. That supports the same idea established by the mechanics. Players are not merely moving pieces through a fictional setting. They are creating the events of an illustrated chronicle. The artwork also gives visual consistency to a project containing hundreds of characters, objects, companions, mounts, and treasures. Each element may come from a different story of literary tradition, but Johnstone's artistic approach places all of them within the same visual world. The art, therefore, does more than establish atmosphere. It helps turn centuries of separate material into one coherent Arthurian landscape. That commitment to expanding and preserving the world continued into the game's crowdfunding campaign. The Siege Perilous GameFound campaign launched back at the end of June and reached its funding goal in approximately 31 minutes. Now, the campaign just ended last week, but I hear rumors it's going to be kicked off to let us have an extension. Its pledge structure included game-found edition of the game by pairing the game with a companion book and custom slipcase and containing signed artwork by Jay Johnstone. The campaign also expanded the amount of gameplay content beyond the planned retail edition. The game-found edition was listed with 35 Force of cards instead of 30, 28 quest cards instead of 25, 16 foreign campaign cards instead of 14, and 8 legendary tales instead of 5. These matter because they are not simply cosmetic upgrades. They add more encounters, journey campaigns, and scenarios to which the Arthurian world can express itself. The campaign also added a custom snap corner dice tray for every backer above the $1 Squire level. The team explained that playtesting sometimes produced dice rolls large enough to scatter standees and tokens across the board. Premium production was certainly part of the campaign's appeal. But the more interesting achievement was the continued expansion of the game's literary and narrative range. The box was not simply becoming more elaborate. The anthology was gaining more stories. And that brings us back to the question of the beginning. Can an entire tradition of mythology become part of a game's design? Siege Perilous cannot contain every Arthurian story ever written. No single game could. What it can do is build a framework capable of connecting many of those traditions. The title provides the ultimate test. The literature provides the world. The mechanics translate Arthurian ideas of journey, reputation, ability, uncertainty, and virtue into strategic decisions. The artwork presents the results as though they belong inside an illuminated chronicle. Each part strengthens the other. That is what separates this project from a game that simply places familiar Arthurian names over unrelated mechanics. Its systems are structured around the idea of becoming worthy. Its world is built to generate adventures rather than dictate one fixed narrative. Its artwork makes those adventures feel like newly discovered pages from a much older tradition. The game is still unreleased, so its final production, balance, and long-term legacy can only be judged after players have spent meaningful time with the finished edition. But the creative ambition is already clear. Play to Z, Brian Salaba, Ivan Alexiev, Jay Johnstone, and Arthurian researcher Jay Musin have attempted to make centuries of Arthuriana playable without reducing them to a single familiar story. Siege Perilous does not ask players to replace Arthur, Galahad, Lancelot, or the other knights whose stories have endured. It asks players to enter the same vast tradition and discover what kind of legend their own knight might leave behind. The Siege Perilous was never merely an empty chair. It was a test of whether a knight had become worthy of the place waiting for them. That is why the title matters. And that is why every journey, every virtue, every skill, every companion, and every difficult decision matters. The game is simply not asking whether your knight can succeed. It's asking whether that knight has earned a place amongst the legends. My name is Jonathan. This is GeekMyGames. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.